The plasma welder hissed and sparked as Jake Sullivan guided it along the fractured hull plating, the blue-white flame casting dancing shadows across the cluttered repair bay. 20 years of fixing everything from atmospheric processors to hyperspace motivators had taught him that every ship told a story, usually one involving poor life choices and cheaper fuel alternatives. This particular vessel, however, whispered secrets in a language he didn't recognize. "You know," Jake called out over the welding noise, not bothering to look up from his work, "most people who show up at 3 in the morning with a shot-up ship at least have the courtesy to bring coffee." The woman standing beside his workbench didn't laugh. She hadn't laughed at any of his jokes since arriving 2 hours ago, which Jake considered a personal failure. Her posture remained perfectly straight despite the grease-stained environment, hands clasped behind her back as she observed his progress with the intensity of someone watching a delicate surgical procedure. "I was unaware that caffeine was customary payment for emergency repairs," she replied, her voice carrying an accent that placed her nowhere Jake could identify. "Perhaps we could negotiate alternative compensation." Jake finally looked up, pushing his welding mask onto his forehead. "Lady, unless you've got a crate of Terran bourbon or the winning lottery numbers for next week's colonial draw, I'm pretty sure my rates are reasonable." He gestured at the sleek craft taking up most of his bay's floor space. "Especially for whatever this thing is supposed to be." The ship defied easy classification. Too small for a military vessel, too sophisticated for civilian transport, and far too elegant for anything that belonged in this part of Nexus Station. Its hull curved in impossible ways that suggested manufacturing techniques beyond current human capabilities, while the propulsion system hummed with harmonics that made Jake's dental fillings ache. "It is a private transport," the woman said, which was technically true in the same way that calling a fusion bomb a heating device was technically accurate. "Right." Jake set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag that had given up any pretense of cleanliness years ago. "And I'm the Emperor of Alpha Centauri. Look, I've been fixing ships since before you were born, and this baby's got more classified tech than a fleet admiral's wet dream. The question is whether you stole it or inherited it." For the first time since her arrival, something shifted in the woman's expression. The corner of her mouth twitched upward, almost imperceptibly. "Inherited, though the distinction often proves academic in my family." Jake studied her more carefully. She was tall for a human woman, maybe 5'8", with silver hair that caught the bay's harsh lighting like spun metal. Her clothing appeared expensive but practical, form-fitting materials that moved like fabric but probably stopped projectiles like armor. Most striking were her ears, elongated and pointed in a way that suggested either extensive genetic modification or non-human ancestry. "Well, your inheritedness," Jake said, earning another almost smile, "your family's got interesting taste in transportation. This propulsion matrix is giving me readings I've never seen before. The energy signatures don't match anything in my database, which, considering I've got specs on everything from Rigelian pleasure barges to vegan mining platforms, is saying something." He moved to the ship's exposed engine compartment, running a diagnostic scanner over the crystalline components that pulsed with their own internal light. "These power conduits are grown, not manufactured. The metal's got a cellular structure that repairs itself. And whatever hit you packed enough punch to overwhelm self-repairing armor, which narrows down the suspect list to about 3 weapon systems in known space." "You are more observant than your establishment suggests," the woman observed, glancing around the cluttered bay with its collection of spare parts, empty food containers, and a motivational poster featuring a kitten hanging from a quantum flux capacitor with the plasma welder hissed and sparked as Jake Sullivan guided it along the fractured hull plating, the blue-white flame casting dancing shadows across the cluttered repair bay. 20 years of fixing everything from atmospheric processors to hyperspace motivators had taught him that every ship told a story, usually one involving poor life choices and cheaper fuel alternatives. This particular vessel, however, whispered secrets in a language he didn't recognize. "You know," Jake called out over the welding noise, not bothering to look up from his work, "most people who show up at 3 in the morning with a shot-up ship at least have the courtesy to bring coffee." The woman standing beside his workbench didn't laugh. She hadn't laughed at any of his jokes since arriving 2 hours ago, which Jake considered a personal failure. Her posture remained perfectly straight despite the grease-stained environment, hands clasped behind her back as she observed his progress with the intensity of someone watching a delicate surgical procedure. "I was unaware that caffeine was customary payment for emergency repairs," she replied, her voice carrying an accent that placed her nowhere Jake could identify. "Perhaps we could negotiate alternative compensation." Jake finally looked up, pushing his welding mask onto his forehead. "Lady, unless you've got a crate of Terran bourbon or the winning lottery numbers for next week's colonial draw, I'm pretty sure my rates are reasonable." He gestured at the sleek craft taking up most of his bay's floor space. "Especially for whatever this thing is supposed to be." The ship defied easy classification. Too small for a military vessel, too sophisticated for civilian transport, and far too elegant for anything that belonged in this part of Nexus Station. Its hull curved in impossible ways that suggested manufacturing techniques beyond current human capabilities, while the propulsion system hummed with harmonics that made Jake's dental fillings ache. "It is a private transport," the woman said, which was technically true in the same way that calling a fusion bomb a heating device was technically accurate. "Right." Jake set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag that had given up any pretense of cleanliness years ago. "And I'm the Emperor of Alpha Centauri. Look, I've been fixing ships since before you were born, and this baby's got more classified tech than a fleet admiral's wet dream. The question is whether you stole it or inherited it." For the first time since her arrival, something shifted in the woman's expression. The corner of her mouth twitched upward, almost imperceptibly. "Inherited, though the distinction often proves academic in my family." Jake studied her more carefully. She was tall for a human woman, maybe 5'8", with silver hair that caught the bay's harsh lighting like spun metal. Her clothing appeared expensive but practical, form-fitting materials that moved like fabric but probably stopped projectiles like armor. Most striking were her ears, elongated and pointed in a way that suggested either extensive genetic modification or non-human ancestry. "Well, your inheritedness," Jake said, earning another almost smile, "your family's got interesting taste in transportation. This propulsion matrix is giving me readings I've never seen before. The energy signatures don't match anything in my database, which, considering I've got specs on everything from Regellian pleasure barges to vegan mining platforms, is saying something." He moved to the ship's exposed engine compartment, running a diagnostic scanner over the crystalline components that pulsed with their own internal light. "These power conduits are grown, not manufactured. The metal's got a cellular structure that repairs itself. And whatever hit you packed enough punch to overwhelm self-repairing armor, which narrows down the suspect list to about 3 weapon systems in known space." "You are more observant than your establishment suggests," the woman observed, glancing around the cluttered bay with its collection of spare parts, empty food containers, and a motivational poster featuring a kitten hanging from a quantum flux capacitor with the caption, "Hang in there, the universe is trying to kill you." "Hey, don't judge the ambience. That poster cost me 50 credits on Risa, and the kitten's eyes follow you around the room. It's very sophisticated." Jake grinned and returned his attention to the engine. "Besides, messy shops build character. Shows we're too busy actually fixing things to worry about interior decorating." The woman moved closer, near enough that Jake caught a faint scent like ozone after lightning. "How long will the repairs require?" "Depends on how honest you want to be about what I'm fixing." Jake straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The hull damage is straightforward, couple hours with the welder and some molecular bonding compound. But these power systems are bleeding exotic matter like a tourist bleeds money on Orion. I can patch the leaks, but without knowing the original specifications, I'm basically performing surgery with a blindfold. Perhaps I could provide some technical guidance." "Now we're talking." Jake pulled up a holographic display of the ship's systems, the blue-green projections filling the space between them. "What I'm seeing here suggests your power core operates on principles that make our best theoretical physicists weep into their coffee. The energy conversion rates alone violate about 6 laws of thermodynamics." The woman stepped closer to the display, her fingers dancing through the holographic components with practiced ease. The conversion process utilizes zero-point field fluctuations channeled through a crystalline matrix grown in quantum-locked chambers. The efficiency appears paradoxical only because your measurement systems assume linear energy relationships. Jake stared at her. Lady, I take back every joke I was about to make about inherited wealth and daddy's spaceship. You just explained exotic matter conversion like you were reading a shopping list. I have some familiarity with the technology. Some familiarity. Right. Jake shook his head, grinning despite himself. I've got doctorates in applied engineering and xenotechnology, and you just made me feel like I learned mechanics from a cereal box. What exactly do you do for a living when you're not crash-landing mysterious superships in my bay? The woman's pause lasted just long enough to be noticeable. I manage inherited responsibilities. That's wonderfully vague. Are we talking family business, government work, or intergalactic crime syndicate? Because my rates vary depending on how likely I am to get shot by your enemies. The probability of violence is non-zero. Jake laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the bay's metal walls. Non-zero. I love it. That's like saying the sun is somewhat luminous or space is mildly large. He gestured at the ship. Fine, keep your secrets for now. But if armed goons show up, the quantum resonance chamber hummed with an intensity that made Jake's teeth ache, its crystalline walls pulsing in rhythm with the ship's damaged core. 4 hours into the repairs, he discovered that whoever had attacked this vessel hadn't been playing around. The energy discharge pattern suggested military-grade particle weapons, the kind that required government authorization just to manufacture. So, Jake said, carefully realigning a flux manifold that cost more than most people's houses, on a scale of 1 to galactic incident, how much trouble are we talking about here? Lyralii, she'd finally offered her name around hour 3, though Jake suspected it wasn't the whole story, knelt beside him in the cramped engine compartment, her long fingers dancing across holographic displays with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of practice. Define trouble. Well, let's see. Trouble level 1 would be angry ex-boyfriend with a restraining order. Level 5 might be corporate bounty hunters. Level 10 would be... Jake paused as he examined a scorched power coupling. Actually, level 10 would be whatever did this to your ship. These burn patterns don't match standard weapon signatures. You are quite observant for someone who claims to run a simple repair facility. Jake laughed, the sound echoing off the chamber's walls. Lady, there's nothing simple about keeping a business running on Nexus Station. You need to know the difference between a legitimate shipping concern and a front for weapons smuggling, or you'll end up fixing someone's cargo hauler and discovering it's full of antimatter warheads. Trust me, that's a conversation you only want to have once. Speaking from experience. Let's just say the Regelian Trade Commission has very specific policies about accidentally enabling mass destruction, and their sense of humor makes Vulcan funeral directors look cheerful. Lyralii's mouth curved upward. The closest thing to a genuine smile Jake had seen from her. I imagine that was an interesting discussion. Oh, it was riveting. Nothing quite like explaining to armed investigators that you thought the glowing canisters were decorative lighting for a nightclub. Which, in my defense, would have been a really cool aesthetic choice. As they worked deeper into the ship's systems, Jake began noticing details that didn't add up. The computer interfaces were too intuitive, responding to Lyralii's touch with the kind of seamless integration that suggested biological compatibility rather than learned operation. The ship's internal architecture flowed in organic curves that seemed grown rather than built, and the materials themselves exhibited properties that violated several fundamental laws of physics. This metal, Jake said, running his scanner over a support beam, it's not just self-repairing. It's actively optimizing its molecular structure based on stress patterns. The computational power required for real-time materials engineering like this would need a quantum core the size of a small moon. Yet here it is in a ship that fits in your repair bay. Exactly. Which means either your people have solved computational problems that have been stumping theoretical physicists for centuries, or this technology comes from somewhere else entirely. Lyraliai's hands stilled on the controls. Define somewhere else. Well, that's the trillion-credit question, isn't it? See, I've worked on ships from every major species in the known galaxy. Humans love redundancy and brute force engineering. Centaurians build everything like it's going to last forever, which is great until you need to fix something. Rigelians treat their ships like jewelry, beautiful, expensive, and utterly impractical. But this. Jake gestured at the impossible machinery surrounding them. This is different. This is elegant in ways that suggest evolutionary rather than design technology. Perhaps my people simply have different engineering philosophies. Your people. Jake set down his tools and looked at her directly. That's the first time you've mentioned having people. Most folks who end up in my shop are running from their people, not protecting them. The silence stretched long enough for Jake to wonder if he'd pushed too far. Finally, Lyraliai spoke. Sometimes protecting and running become the same thing. Ah. The old greater good dilemma. I'm familiar with that particular brand of misery. Used to work for Stellar Dynamics before I opened this place. Great pay, excellent benefits, and the minor downside of occasionally having to build weapons systems for people who considered planetary bombardment a legitimate negotiating tactic. What changed your mind? Same thing that always changes people's minds. I met someone who made me realize there were more important things than job security and a comfortable retirement plan. Unfortunately, she also made me realize that some moral lines, once crossed, tend to stay crossed. Jake pulled up a diagnostic readout showing the ship's power distribution networks. The patterns were unlike anything in his databases, flowing in spirals and fractals that seemed almost artistic in their complexity. You know what's funny, he continued, making adjustments to a quantum field stabilizer. I've been assuming whoever shot you up was the bad guy in this scenario. But looking at these systems, I'm starting to wonder if maybe they were just really, really scared. Scared of what? Of technology that makes our best military hardware look like stone knives and bearskins. Of a ship that could probably level a space station without breaking a sweat. Of whoever would casually fly around in something this advanced and then trust a random mechanic to fix it. Lyraliai was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that hadn't been there before. Fear makes people do terrible things. So does power. And lady, this ship represents the kind of power that starts and ends wars. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the hypnotic rhythm of repairs creating its own meditative space. Jake found himself stealing glances at his mysterious client, noting the way she moved with unconscious grace even in the cramped confines of the engine compartment. Her ear tips occasionally caught the ambient light from the quantum displays, and he wondered again about the genetic modifications that had produced such an elegant result. Can I ask you something? Jake said as he sealed the last of the damaged conduits. And feel free to tell me to mind my own business, because I realize we've only known each other for a few hours and most of that time has been spent elbow-deep in exotic matter converters. Ask. Are you happy? The question seemed to catch Lyraliai off guard. She paused in her work, fingers hovering over a control panel. That is an unusual question. Maybe. But I've been watching you work, and you know this ship better than I know my own tools. This isn't just transportation for you, it's home. But there's something in the way you touch the controls, like you're saying goodbye every time you shut down a system. And when you think I'm not looking, you get this expression like you're carrying the weight of the world. Perhaps I am. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Most people would laugh and say something like, the universe is heavy enough without adding to it. But you take the question seriously, which suggests either impressive emotional maturity or a really depressing life story. Why not both? Jake grinned. You keep saying that. I'm starting to think it's your default response to difficult questions. It has served me well. I bet it has. But here's the thing about carrying the weight of the world, eventually, your back gives out. And when it does, you need someone around who's dumb enough to help you carry the load. Lyralii finally looked at him directly, her unusual eyes reflecting the quantum chamber's shifting light. And you believe you are sufficiently foolish for such a task? Lady, I once spent 3 days trying to fix a hyperdrive that turned out to be unplugged. I've been ejected from more cantinas than most people have visited. I thought a vegan pleasure yacht was a catering ship and accidentally provided mechanical support for an interspecies diplomatic incident that required formal apologies from 3 governments. So yeah, I'd say my qualifications in the stupidity department are pretty solid. For the first time since her arrival, Lyralii laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face. You paint a compelling picture of professional incompetence. Hey, I prefer, creatively challenged. And for the record, the hyperdrive thing could have happened to anyone. The plug was really well hidden. The laughter faded, but something had shifted between them. The careful formality was still there, but underneath it, Jake sensed the beginning of something that might eventually become trust. The repairs are nearly complete, Lyralii said, running final diagnostics on the restored systems. Your work is exceptional. High praise from someone who apparently designed half this stuff. Speaking of which, I don't suppose you'd be interested in sharing a few technical specifications. Nothing classified, just enough to update my databases so the next time someone shows up with impossible technology, I don't spend 4 hours scratching my head and making wild guesses. That would not be advisable. Didn't think so. Well, it was worth asking. Can't blame a guy for trying to expand his professional horizons. Outside the ship, Jake's proximity sensors chimed softly. Someone was approaching the repair bay. He glanced at his security display and frowned. 3 figures in Galactic Authority uniforms were walking purposefully through the station's main corridor, their destination clearly his facility. Lyralii, Jake said quietly, we may have a problem. The security display showed 3 Galactic Authority agents moving through Nexus Station's corridors with the determined stride of people who'd found exactly what they were looking for. Jake watched them pause at information kiosks, flash their credentials, and receive pointing fingers that all seemed to indicate his repair bay. Well, Jake said, shutting down the display, the good news is they're not running, which means they probably don't expect a fight. The bad news is they're Galactic Authority, which means someone with serious political connections wants to have a chat with you. Lyralii emerged from the ship's interior, her movements suddenly more fluid and purposeful. How long until they arrive? Maybe 3 minutes if they stick to the main corridors. Less if they know the service tunnels. Jake began casually gathering tools and wiping down surfaces. You know, most people in your situation would be looking for the nearest airlock right about now. I am not most people. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. Question is, are we talking about the kind of not most people who can handle 3 GA agents with a stern conversation and proper paperwork, or the kind who can handle them with exotic weapons and questionable physics? Lyralii paused in whatever preparations she was making. Would you prefer a specific approach? Jake considered this seriously. Honestly, I've never been shot at by Galactic Authority agents, and I'd like to keep that streak going. On the other hand, I've also never harbored anyone interesting enough to warrant GA attention, so there's a certain professional pride at stake here. Professional pride in criminal harboring? Hey, I prefer providing sanctuary to politically inconvenient individuals. It sounds more noble, and nobility is important when you're probably about to get arrested. The ship's systems hummed as Lyralii activated what appeared to be some kind of scanning array. Holographic displays materialized around her, showing detailed schematics of the station's immediate vicinity. 3 agents, standard armament, biosigns consistent with human baseline physiology. They appear to be conducting a routine investigation rather than preparing for armed confrontation. Jake stared at the displays. Okay, that's terrifying and impressive in equal measure. Your ship just scanned through about 6 layers of station shielding and gave us a complete tactical analysis in under 10 seconds. The computing power alone should have triggered every sensor on the station. The scanning array operates on principles that conventional detection systems cannot perceive. Right. Quantum entanglement. Subspace frequencies. Or did your people just invent really good stealth technology? Yes. Jake laughed despite the approaching danger. You know what? I'm starting to appreciate your communication style. It's refreshingly honest in its complete lack of useful information. The proximity alarms chimed again as the agents reached the outer checkpoint of Jake's facility. Through the security feed, Jake watched them present identification to his automated systems and receive clearance to proceed. They moved with professional calm, hands resting near but not on their weapons. They're being polite, Jake observed. That's either a good sign or a really bad sign, depending on whether they think you're dangerous or just valuable. Both assessments would be accurate. And there we go again with the ominous honesty. Look, I need to know what we're dealing with here. Are you a political refugee, a weapons designer, a really well-dressed terrorist, or something else entirely? Because my response strategy varies significantly based on which category of trouble you represent. Lyralii moved to the ship's main console and began entering commands with practiced efficiency. I am Queen Lyralii of the Aetherian Collective, currently fleeing an assassination attempt orchestrated by political factions seeking to manipulate my people into a war that would destabilize half the galaxy. Jake stopped pretending to organize tools and stared at her. I'm sorry, did you just say queen? As in, actual royalty with a crown and everything? The crown is ceremonial and impractical for space travel. Right, of course. Crowns probably mess with helmet seals. Jake ran his hands through his hair. Okay, so let me get this straight. I've been fixing the spaceship of an actual queen, making jokes about hyperdrive plugs, and offering unsolicited life advice to someone who probably has actual advisors for that sort of thing. Your advice has been surprisingly insightful. That's terrifying. If my life advice seems good to someone qualified to run a space empire, your empire might be in more trouble than you thought. The agents had reached the bay's main entrance. Jake could hear their voices through the comm system as they identified themselves and requested permission to enter. Standard procedure called for him to comply immediately. Refusing entry to GA agents was the kind of mistake that people only made once. Your Majesty, Jake said, then paused. Is that the right title? I've never addressed royalty before. The closest I've come was when I accidentally called a Centaurian trade commissioner, Your Excellency, and he got so flustered he gave me a discount on reactor parts. Lyralii will suffice. Good, because, Your Majesty, feels weird coming from someone whose most formal clothing has oil stains. Jake activated the bay's comm system. Galactic Authority agents, this is Jake Sullivan. Please state your business. Mr. Sullivan, we're conducting a routine investigation regarding suspicious vessel traffic in this sector. We'd like to inspect any ships currently in your facility and speak with their operators. Jake looked at Lyralii, who had somehow managed to appear completely calm despite the circumstances. Define suspicious, Agent. Agent Martinez. Vessels exhibiting unusual energy signatures or technological characteristics that don't match standard commercial or military classifications. Well, that's specific enough to be worrying. Jake glanced at the ship, which was currently displaying energy readings that would make a theoretical physicist weep with joy. Give me a minute to make sure my current client is decent. You know how it is with the fancy ship owners, they get touchy about people seeing them without their formal space jewelry. Through the comm, Jake heard what might have been Agent Martinez suppressing a laugh. Take your time, Mr. Sullivan. See? Jake said to Lyralii as he muted the comm, they're being polite. Either they don't know who you are, or they know exactly who you are and they're being very careful about how they handle this situation. The distinction may prove academic. True. So what's the plan? Do we go with diplomatic immunity, claim you're a really dedicated cosplayer, or should I start composing my last will and testament? Lyralii touched a control surface, and the ship's systems began cycling through what appeared to be a pre-programmed shutdown sequence. We answer their questions truthfully within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters. I like that. Very royal. Very diplomatic. Jake straightened his work clothes and tried to look like someone who hadn't spent the last 6 hours tampering with technology that could probably conquer solar systems. Anything I should avoid mentioning? Like the part where your ship violates most of known physics, or the bit where you casually mention being queen of a space empire. Those details would be best omitted. Good call. I'll stick to discussing the weather and how surprisingly difficult it is to find decent coffee on a space station. Jake reactivated the comm system. Agent Martinez, we're ready for your inspection. The bay doors cycled open, admitting 3 agents in standard GA uniforms. They moved with the careful professionalism of people who knew that routine investigations had a tendency to become less routine without warning. Agent Martinez, a compact woman with the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward first. Mr. Sullivan, thank you for your cooperation. I'm Agent Martinez, this is Agent Chen and Agent Torres. We're investigating reports of unusual spacecraft activity in this sector. Happy to help, Jake said, gesturing around the bay. Though I should warn you, unusual is pretty much my specialty. Last week I had someone bring in a ship that was technically powered by controlled temporal paradoxes. Great fuel efficiency, terrible for causality. Agent Chen consulted a handheld scanner. This vessel exhibits energy signatures consistent with our search parameters. What's the nature of the work being performed? Jake glanced at Lyralii, who stepped forward with the kind of calm confidence that suggested she dealt with government officials regularly. Standard maintenance and minor repairs, Agent. Nothing that requires special permits or documentation. And you are? A private citizen utilizing Mr. Sullivan's services for routine spacecraft maintenance. Agent Martinez studied Lyralii with professional interest. Your vessel's registration. Filed with the appropriate authorities and current according to all applicable regulations. Jake watched the verbal chess match with fascination. Lyralii was answering every question without actually providing any useful information, while maintaining the appearance of complete cooperation. It was like watching a master class in diplomatic evasion. The energy readings from your ship are quite unusual, Agent Torres said, running a more detailed scan. We're seeing power levels that exceed standard civilian specifications. High-performance vessels often require specialized components, Lyralii replied smoothly. I'm sure Mr. Sullivan can attest to the wide variety of propulsion systems encountered in his line of work. Oh, absolutely, Jake jumped in. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff people fly around in. I once worked on a ship that was technically held together by optimistic thinking and a really complicated insurance policy. Compared to that, this is practically mundane. Agent Martinez smiled slightly. Optimistic thinking as a construction material? Well, there were also some exotic matter stabilizers and a prayer to whatever deity watches over poor engineering decisions. But mostly optimistic thinking. Mr. Sullivan, how long have you been operating this facility? About 8 years. Before that, I worked for Stellar Dynamics doing military contracts. Decided I preferred fixing things that weren't specifically designed to blow up other things. And your client here, how long have you known her? Jake considered his answer carefully. We met when she brought her ship in for repairs. Professional relationship, you understand. Though I have to say, she's got the most impressive technical knowledge of any client I've ever worked with. Really knows her way around exotic propulsion systems. Agent Chen's scanner beeped insistently. Ma'am, we're detecting some unusual energy patterns that warrant further investigation. For the first time, Jake saw something that might have been concern cross Lyralii's features. Is there a problem, Agent? We'd like to run a more comprehensive scan of your vessel's systems. Standard procedure for craft exhibiting anomalous readings. Of course, Lyralii said. Though I should mention that some of the components are quite sensitive to certain scanning frequencies. Perhaps Mr. Sullivan could supervise to ensure no damage occurs to the systems he's been repairing. That would be acceptable. Jake found himself in the surreal position of providing technical commentary while GA agents discovered that his client's ship contained technology that theoretically shouldn't exist. He managed to deflect most of their questions with increasingly creative explanations involving theoretical physics and the importance of proper calibration procedures. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in our database, Agent Torres muttered, studying his readings with obvious confusion. Quantum stuff tends to be tricky, Jake offered helpfully. I always tell people, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you probably don't understand quantum mechanics. That's actually a quote from Richard Feynman, Agent Chen said. Smart guy. Probably would have made a decent mechanic if he'd applied himself properly. As the inspection continued, Jake began to appreciate the impossible tightrope they were walking. The agents were clearly dealing with technology beyond their understanding, but their training kept them focused on procedures and protocols rather than the implications of what they were discovering. Your documentation appears to be in order, Agent Martinez said finally. Though I have to say, this is one of the most unusual vessels we've encountered in this sector. Thank you, Lyralii said graciously. I take pride in maintaining distinctive transportation. Just one more question, Agent Martinez said, her tone carefully neutral. Have you had any contact with representatives of the Etherian Collective recently? The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable before Lyralii answered. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that organization, Agent. Jake held his breath, waiting to see if the agents would accept what was technically the truth delivered with masterful precision. Agent Martinez studied Lyralii's face with the intensity of someone who'd spent years learning to read lies. The silence stretched until Jake felt compelled to fill it with the kind of nervous chatter that had gotten him through 2 decades of dealing with suspicious customers and temperamental machinery. You know, Jake said, wiping his hands on a rag that had given up any pretense of cleanliness, the Etherian Collective sounds familiar. Weren't they the ones with the really good wine? Or was that the Altarian Consortium? I always get my mysterious space empires confused. The Etherian Collective, Agent Chen said slowly, is a political entity that's been maintaining strict neutrality in current galactic conflicts. Recent intelligence suggests internal political tensions that could affect regional stability. Ah, Jake nodded sagely. Politics. That explains why I don't recognize the name. I try to avoid anything more politically complicated than arguing with suppliers about shipping rates. Much safer for my blood pressure and my continued existence. Agent Martinez made a note on her scanner. MS. Valdris, Lyralii supplied smoothly. Lyra Valdris. Ms. Valdris, your vessel's technical specifications are quite remarkable. The power output readings suggest capabilities that would be of interest to various military organizations. I prefer efficient transportation, Lyralii replied. Though I understand that efficiency and military applications often overlap in unfortunate ways. Jake watched the conversation with growing appreciation for Lyralii's diplomatic skills. She was managing to dance around direct questions while maintaining an appearance of complete cooperation. It was like watching a master craftsman work with precision tools. The repairs are nearly complete, Jake interjected. Should be finished within the hour, assuming no one needs me to explain quantum mechanics to government officials. That conversation always ends with everyone confused and me questioning my life choices. Agent Torres consulted his readings one more time. The energy signatures are stabilizing within acceptable parameters. Whatever work you've performed appears to have resolved the anomalous fluctuations we detected. That's what I do, Jake said with genuine pride. Fix things that shouldn't work until they work better than they should. It's not a particularly logical profession, but it pays the bills and occasionally provides interesting conversation topics at parties. How often do you work on vessels of this technological sophistication? Agent Martinez asked. More often than you'd think, less often than I'd like. The really advanced stuff is fascinating to work on, but it tends to come with complications. Jake gestured around his cluttered bay. Like government inspections, angry former owners, and the occasional attempt at hostile takeover by artificial intelligences. That last one only happened twice, but it was memorable both times. Agent Chen looked up from his scanner. Hostile takeover by artificial intelligences. Long story involving a shipping computer that achieved consciousness and decided humans were inefficient cargo handlers. Turned out it was right, but its solution involved replacing the crew with automated systems. Very awkward negotiations. How did you resolve the situation? Convinced the AI that customer service was more important than efficiency. Amazing how quickly artificial consciousness develops appreciation for job security when you explain unemployment benefits. The agents exchanged glances that suggested they weren't entirely sure whether Jake was joking. Lyraliai's mouth twitched in what might have been suppressed amusement. Mr. Sullivan, Agent Martinez said, your repair records indicate an impressive range of technical expertise. Have you ever considered applying for government contract work? I appreciate the offer, but I've done the government thing. Turns out I'm allergic to bureaucracy and committees. Makes me break out in sarcasm and inappropriate jokes at security briefings. That could be considered a valuable skill in certain diplomatic contexts. See, that's exactly the kind of thinking that got me in trouble at Stellar Dynamics. My supervisor once told me that my approach to conflict resolution was creatively unorthodox. I'm pretty sure that wasn't a compliment. Agent Martinez closed her scanner and nodded to her colleagues. Ms. Valdres, your documentation appears to be in order. Mr. Sullivan, thank you for your cooperation with our investigation. Always happy to help, Jake said. Though next time, maybe bring coffee. Government inspections go much smoother when everyone's properly caffeinated. We'll take that under advisement. As the agents prepared to leave, Agent Torres paused at the bay entrance. Ms. Valdres, if you don't mind me asking, what's your destination when repairs are complete? Lyralii considered this question with the care of someone choosing words that would be technically accurate without being particularly informative. I have business to conclude in several systems. Nothing that would require official attention. Travel safely, Agent Martinez said. And Mr. Sullivan, we may contact you if we need additional technical consultation on similar cases. Just remember the coffee thing. I'm much more helpful when properly caffeinated. After the agents departed, Jake and Lyralii stood in the sudden quiet of the repair bay. The ship's systems hummed with perfect efficiency, all damage repaired and all systems optimized beyond their original specifications. Well, Jake said finally, that was either the most anticlimactic government investigation in history, or they know exactly who you are and they're playing a much more complicated game than I can follow. Both assessments are likely accurate. Jake laughed. There you go again with the cryptic honesty. You know, for someone who just spent the last hour lying to federal agents, you're remarkably committed to telling me the truth. I have not lied to you. No, but you've been creative with the truth in ways that would make a politician weep with envy. Queen Lyralii becomes Lyra Valdres, mysterious alien technology becomes efficient transportation, and fleeing assassination attempts becomes business to conclude in several systems. Lyralii moved to the ship's main console and began running final system checks. Would you have preferred complete honesty from the beginning? Honestly? Probably not. I'm not sure I was ready to hear, hello, I'm the queen of a space empire and I need you to fix my escape pod while political assassins hunt me across the galaxy. That's a lot to process before coffee. And now? Jake considered this seriously. Now I'm thinking that queens probably put their pants on one leg at a time just like everyone else, and fixing things is fixing things regardless of who owns them. Though I have to admit, the whole royalty thing explains why you tip so well. The payment was appropriate for the quality of work performed. It was generous, and we both know it. Just like we both know that this conversation is heading toward you offering me something that will probably complicate my life in ways I can't imagine. Lyralii turned from the console to face him directly. Your assessment is correct. Right. So here's the thing, I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About how sometimes protecting and running become the same thing. And I've been thinking about my own situation here, running a repair shop on the edge of nowhere because I got tired of building things that were designed to break other things. And what conclusions have you reached? That maybe running away and moving towards something aren't as different as I thought. That maybe fixing broken things is fixing broken things, whether it's a hyperdrive or a political situation that's threatening to tear apart half the galaxy. Jake moved to where Lyralii stood beside her ship, close enough to see the weariness in her unusual eyes despite her composed exterior. So when you ask me to stay with you, and we both know that's where this conversation is going, you should know that I'm not just agreeing to help fix your ship. I'm agreeing to help fix whatever's broken in your world, even though I have no idea what I'm getting into. The risks are considerable. Yeah, well, so is spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to say yes to the most interesting person who's ever walked into my shop. Lyralii smiled then, the first completely unguarded expression Jake had seen from her. You are certain of this decision? Absolutely not. I'm terrified, completely unprepared, and probably making the worst decision of my life. But I'm also more excited than I've been in years, and that has to count for something. It counts for everything. Jake began gathering essential tools and personal items, the practiced efficiency of someone who'd moved between jobs and star systems before. So what's the plan? Do I need to pack formal clothes for meeting with other royalty, or should I stick with my usual wardrobe of work shirts and optimism? Your current attire will be acceptable for most situations. Good, because my formal wear consists of a shirt with fewer stains and pants that match. Not exactly diplomatic dress code material. As Jake packed his belongings into a worn duffel bag that had seen better decades, he realized that for the first time since leaving Stellar Dynamics, he felt like he was moving towards something rather than away from it. The decision to abandon his repair shop and follow an alien queen into unknown dangers should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. One last question, Jake said as he secured the bay's systems for indefinite closure. When this all goes horribly wrong, and something this crazy is bound to go wrong eventually, will you at least admit that you should have listened to the guy who thought hyperdrive problems could be solved by checking the power cord? I will defer to your technical expertise in all matters relating to the fundamental importance of proper connections. Jake grinned and shouldered his bag. That's all I ask. That and maybe a heads up before we do anything that violates major laws of physics. I like to be mentally prepared for impossible things. I believe you will find that the impossible becomes quite routine in my line of work. Your Majesty, Jake said, offering a mock bow that was only half joking, I'm counting on it. As Lyralii's ship lifted off from Nexus Station's docking bay, Jake looked back at the facility that had been his home and workplace for 8 years. He felt no regret, only the anticipation that came with embarking on something that would either be the greatest adventure of his life or the most spectacular failure in galactic history. Either way, it was going to be interesting. And after years of routine repairs and predictable problems, interesting was exactly what Jake Sullivan needed.